Stan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
So I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh my gosh, so many things. There was actually there were a couple of years there I wanted to own a comic book store. I thought that'd be the
Oh,
coolest when I was in
cool.
middle school.
That's the first time I've heard that one on the podcast. That's awesome.
Yeah, there was about a year where I wanted to be a dentist. There were a couple of years when I wanted to have my own radio show.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so really a variety of things.
Yeah. And how do you think those things connect to what you do today? And what do you do today for the audience that doesn't know?
Thank you. So I am both a leadership coach and a professor of leadership studies as well as a writer. So it's an amalgam. Well, okay, yeah, it's an amalgamation of things that I do today, and I guess there you see that varied interest. Even as a kid, I had a hard time settling in on, gosh, what am I going to do with myself? So I think to a certain extent, I'm still figuring that out.
Well, where did you start? Did you start as a writer? Did you start as a professor? Kind of walk us through, what did you major in college?
Yeah, so I actually majored in religious studies in college. I planned to go into Christian ministry, and so realized I wasn't necessarily cut out for church work. So I worked for a variety of nonprofits, Christian camp for a number of years, really enjoyed kind of parachurch work, went to seminary because that's kind of what you do on that path.
Yeah.
By the time I finished my seminary training, I realized really it was the education side of things that I liked. So I spent the next 13 and a half years at a secondary school, both as an educator and administrator. Taught, it was a private school, so I taught the religious studies curriculum, director of campus life and ministry, as well as humanities. Did some additional graduate work in the humanities, taught logic and rhetoric. While doing that, again, decided I really wanted to make the most of working in education. In order to do that, I felt like I needed a PhD. So I pursued a PhD, found a program that allowed me to do a PhD in leadership studies without having to relocate my family, which at the time really wasn't an option. And so with that, ended up with a PhD in leadership studies. And by the time I got to the end of that program, there was a woman in the program who's kind of a mentor for me. She was actually approaching the end of her career, just a really driven person who basically says, well, I'm going to retire, so I think I'll go get a PhD because I need another challenge.
And how was that, getting a PhD while also with your family life? I can imagine that must have been tough.
It was demanding. Yeah, it was a whole other story. So that would be another rabbit trail. But to sort of finish this one, essentially, she suggested I look at leadership coaching. And so that's what got me into coaching. And then along the way, I've always been writing things. I wrote curriculum, self-published a couple books. I enjoyed writing blogs or being a contributing writer to various periodicals. So that's what did the writing piece, the teaching piece, the professoring piece, then with the PhD, teaching online, variety of programs and ethical leadership, things of that nature. And now I'm here with my coaching business as well as teaching and writing.
That's amazing. Well, it seems like you have always had a lot going on, juggling a lot. So I think the topic of your book is probably you're a subject matter expert on this. Do you mind sharing what the name of your book is?
How to Beat Burnout for yourself, your family, and your team. I'm sure we'll leave a link in the show notes.
Yes, we will. So tell me about burnout, because I imagine a person managing a PhD program, teaching, writing, burnout could be pretty likely in that scenario.
Yeah. So speaking of stories, you're asking how that whole experience was. So during that time, my wife also was in a severe car accident, had a head injury. So she lost her job. The woman that hit her didn't have any insurance. So it was, kind of a financial strain, as well as she spent really the next year spending a lot of time just in bed and not really able to engage people, physical therapy, speech therapy, all these things. And this was actually in my last year of PhD coursework while I was also working full time. A couple months later, I was in a car accident. Somebody ran me off the road. And then shortly after that, ironically, I was taking some meds because of the pain related to the car accident, ended up throwing up my computer. So I lost the laptop that had all my PhD stuff on it.
Oh no.
It was a season.
God. Oh my goodness.
So I say all that to say, so fast forward a couple of years. So 2013, I graduated in February, finished everything up, passed my dissertation, defense. And a week later, I end up in the emergency room with a bowel obstruction. Healthy 40-year-old male, physically active, eat right, all those things, yet something was really wrong. That was a 2-year process of fighting intestinal infections, struggling to eat solid food, et cetera, with continually dire prognoses until we had a conversation where the doctor said, Stan, let's talk about quality of life.
Wow.
So at that point, I ended up at the Mayo Clinic, and after 2 weeks of poking and prodding by the best medical minds in the US, if not possibly the world, the doctor sat me down and said, Mr. Ward, tell us how you manage your stress. So that really caught my attention about the importance of stress management. So that's part of what's getting us to this.
Yeah.
Burnout is different than stress. It is something that can happen from extensive stress. And so let's do some nuancing here.
Yep.
You know, imagine a car engine, right? So when a car engine runs out of gasoline, what does it do? Sort of sputters, and stops. So you might think of that as just being worn out, spent, exhausted, because all you have to do is rest and refuel to get going again. Burnout is what happens when you try to run that same car engine without oil. Now, because there's some residual oil there in the engine, right, it'll function for a time. But as it's working, what does it do? It does damage to itself until it finally breaks. And it may break in such a way that it can't be repaired. That's the burnout phenomena. We keep going, even though we don't have the resources we need to do it. Somehow we kind of keep pushing, but in the process, we're doing damage to ourselves. That's true burnout. And it exemplifies itself in 3 dimensions. So the first dimension of burnout is emotional exhaustion. Again, that just sense of overload, overwhelm, I don't have the energy to get up and face the day kind of thing, which could also look like depression, right? So, I mean, there's some nuance here we have to untangle. The second piece is depersonalization. It can express itself in cynicism, a real robot-like experience in work. I express it as sort of a disconnect from people and purpose. And that disconnect's really important, which we can talk about a little more later. And then the third piece of it is a growing sense of ineffectiveness or a lack of personal accomplishment. So as that overload, cynicism, and ineffectiveness come together, the more those are present, the more we're experiencing burnout. Wow. And it's a spectrum, so it's not an off or on phenomenon. All of us are experiencing some measure of these 3 things in our work life because pressure is unavoidable. There is an expense that comes just from doing the work, right? We have to invest ourselves in it in some way.
Right.
Yet it's a question of, are these in a healthy range or an unhealthy range?
And you mentioned that it was also different from stress. So where does the stress piece come in?
Yeah. So what we know about stress is we can distinguish eustress, EUSTRESS. Anytime and again, I'm going to geek out just for a minute. So that EU prefix means good, right? Eulogy, euphemism, euphoria. So anytime you have you before something, it means good. So good stress, eustress versus distress, the bad stress. One of the most helpful things I've found to kind of help distinguish some of this is from the Center for Creative Leadership. They've done some research in this area, again, related to the stress that leaders experience. And you might think of the difference between pressure versus stress, right? Pressure is unavoidable. That's what gets us up to do work. It motivates us. A lot of us are driven, right? So that pressure actually can energize us. Stress is when we start to ruminate on the pressure and we start to internalize a lot of stuff around that pressure, focusing our energy, either sort of beating ourselves up about the past, worrying about things we can't control in the future. And the more we're doing of that kind of thing, that's that true rumination. It keeps us from taking action. And essentially, that's where we start to feel a lot of the negative consequences of stress.
So when you're thinking about all of this, and so when we go back to that point, when the doctor asked you at the Mayo Clinic, how are you managing stress? What did you say then?
Well, I remember my mind thinking, you've got to be kidding me. Like, surely we're not having that conversation right now. Like,
oh, so it was like, no, this isn't stress related.
Yeah, I'm bigger than that. I'm stronger than that. I don't. This isn't. Don't give me this wishy-washy stress talk. Which, looking back, may have been part of the problem, right? This just total disconnect, a lack of awareness of what was going on in my body.
Yeah.
That was part
Yeah.
of it.
And it manifests for people in different ways. I know when I'm super stressed, I get these horrible headaches. When I was in a really stressful job, I had headaches that wouldn't go away. I had an MRI done. I was taking really strong pills. And then I left that job and went to another, and the headaches went away. It was
Yes.
it was very interesting.
Yeah. So it sounds like part of your journey was an awareness of where you were with the stress. There's something going on physically. You tuned in and you
Yeah.
realized, oh, wait a minute.
Well, I didn't even realize I just left because I was so miserable. And then they
Oh,
went
wow.
away.
Okay.
And I thought, whoa, I didn't realize that they were going to go away after. I just thought, I don't know, something's going on. I don't know what it is. I
Yeah.
knew it
It's
was,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, no, this is a great conversation. It's interesting. People feel their stress in different places, typically head, heart, or gut, kind of what I hear, or
Oh,
maybe
interesting.
shoulders, right? Tension,
Yeah.
neck tension, and the stress. Some people may have pain in their back. But as a coach, I really tune into what's going on in the head, that buzzing sensation, maybe the headaches you're
Mm,
describing,
mm,
that the
mm-hmm,
pressure in the chest, or just that tightness in the gut, the upset gut.
mm, mm,
Often those are some of the first indicators, as well as
mm.
just the sort of common things, again, that neck tension, shoulders, that
Yeah.
area.
Yeah. And I think this is something that people really aren't aware of. We kind of dismiss it, kind of like your initial reaction of like, it can't just be stress. I mean, has to be something else. So what happened after your doctor said, how's your quality of life?
Yeah, well, essentially, I followed up. Mayo had a 2 week. We really figured out what had happened was that my digestive tract, in a lot of ways, it kind of just seized up
Mm,
from that stress, right?
mm, mm.
So, without going into a whole lot of detail, right? Really, it was like 2 weeks of sort of physical therapy and some things so that I could learn to
Mm,
let my system
mm,
relax, rest, and digest like it's supposed to. And remember,
mm.
that's that whole, fight or flight, right? Would be the
Yep.
sympathetic nervous system.
Yep.
Well, the parasympathetic system is the
Yeah.
rest and digest. So
Mm,
you might think of it as sort of getting stuck in this chronic sense of fight or flight, which is so relevant to what's happening
yeah.
today as we
Oh
look at the
yeah.
pandemic, not to mention just various kinds of social unrest.
Yeah.
When you're stuck in that space, it has very real physical consequences.
Mm.
Not
And
to mention, if you're leading an organization, inevitably that's just going to come out on the people that you're managing.
yeah. Yeah. I know in coaching conversations, I'll hear of clients just feeling like they always have to be on. And, the ding of the emails at 24 hours a day, right? Like there's this constant feeling of having to be on all the time. It's this like survival fight or flight
Yes.
all the
I think
time.
I think you're spot on. I have talked with clients before. The metaphor that really resonates with them is, think about an appliance. Let's say you got a microwave with a
Mm,
broken off switch. So it's always on and always running.
mm,
At some point that's bad, right?
mm,
So what do? Well, you have to unplug it.
mm,
And so talking about the disciplines that help us unplug.
mm. And what are those?
Yeah. So the first thing is to think about how to rest and refresh,
Mm,
and to
mhm,
understand the difference between rest and numbing.
mhm. Like
Um,
Netflix binging, Instagram
yeah,
scrolling.
exactly. I feel good after one episode of a show. After the whole season, right, in one sitting, I may not be feeling so
Mm,
rested. I may be
mm,
feeling lethargic, or
mm,
just kind of
mm,
gross, right?
mm,
And that's really the test for rest versus numbing is, okay, after I engage in the activity, how do I feel, right?
mm,
One glass of wine, maybe I'm a little more sociable. I call it social lubricant. A little more relaxed. Multiple glasses of wine, I'm going to get a headache, right? So,
yeah.
or not feel so good the next day.
Mm,
That kind of helps us distinguish between rest and numbing, or even, what's my motivation here? Am I trying to just really distract myself from a chronic situation, or am I trying to, again, rest, reset so I can go back and engage in it again?
mm. Yeah, I know when I was in a role that was really stressful, I'd come home really late from work and I should have gone to sleep, but I felt like, well, I want to do something to feel like I have a little part of my day. So I would stay up really late watching TV, and I would wake up super tired the next morning again. And because I was trying to numb that feeling, I guess. And really, I should have gone to sleep probably. I would have felt so much better. Sleep would have been huge.
Yeah, and as I talk with folks, that's kind of one of the building blocks that we'll check in on.
Mm,
Sleep, nutrition, and exercise
mm,
really are important for managing this stuff.
Hmm.
Sleep is foundational. A lot of folks right now are sleep deprived in one way or another. And the reason I'm kind of staring off into space and thinking about this is I have not read the research since the pandemic started. I know previous to the pandemic, though, we were seeing a lot of just people just simply not getting enough sleep, starting to have consequences, cloudy thinking, distracted thinking, maybe grumpiness, things like that.
Yeah. And would you speak to, and I'm sure it's been aggravated by the pandemic, because I know in the past I'd had people, and when I was in certain roles, where the lack of sleep was almost like a badge of honor. Like, I don't need sleep. I can function on 5 hours, no problem. And just being really reflective of my experience, really thinking about my experience. I know that I was more emotional. I got stressed out more. I couldn't think. It just, maybe I didn't notice at first, but when I started really paying attention, I realized that it was that lack of sleep that was kind of this downward spiral during the day when I was under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressure. Would you speak to that? 'Cause if there's someone listening who's like, sleep is not that important. I think most listeners probably understand that. But if there's someone out there who maybe is thinking, well, I can function on 5 hours, I'm okay.
Yeah, it is possible. There are,
Mm,
that's the exception rather than the rule. One of my
mhm.
roommates in college was one of those guys. He could get by on 4 hours of sleep, and we were all so jealous of him for it. And he was still fully functional. However, yeah, I would think of sleep as part of your human maintenance.
Mm,
And so, how well does your car do if you never change the oil, right? So, I would say if you're getting feedback that maybe you're a little testy, or if you're noticing your performance is starting to dip, especially in your executive functioning,
mm,
your ability to think clearly, make good decisions, stay emotionally engaged, have a sense of margin in your life. If you're losing some of that stuff,
mm,
yeah, let's start with sleep and see what's going on.
mm. And what do you recommend starting with? Like, what have you seen in clients or your life where is it like adding 30 minutes, adding a full hour? Like, is it a slow thing or is it like, let's just go strong and try to get the 8 hours, or what do you see?
Usually, what we do is we set a goal and we just start tracking how well the person's doing at that goal, at going to bed at that time
Mm.
or
Yeah.
getting up at that time. One of the things I'll encourage folks on is to say, okay, let's focus on making sure you're getting sleep.
Mhm.
Sometimes folks will say, well, I need to get up to exercise.
Mm.
And what I encourage folks to do is let's put the sleep first.
Mm.
Now, if you're exercising in order to get, if you can't go to sleep because you're not getting enough movement during the day, okay, that's a different deal. But
Mhm.
otherwise, let's let your sleep in, basically. Let's give
Mm.
yourself that time. Let's try that and see what difference that makes it first, realizing that we're using small experiments here.
Mm.
Although the goal is to create some sort of lasting, permanent, sort of sticky change,
Yeah.
the process is using small experiments where the focus is on learning and applying that learning to further action, realizing that we're going to be continually changing our tactics.
Mm.
So that gives us some freedom to try some things.
Mhm.
So starting
Yeah.
there.
So you talked about unplugging and there's disciplines. You said rest versus numbing. What else can we do to beat that burnout?
So there's intentional rest, and then there's
Mhm.
also things that are intentionally recharging. What are the things that put energy back into your system?
Mm.
And the nice thing about this is these are things that can actually happen as part of your work day. And I'll give you some
Oh.
examples of this.
Mhm.
So one person I was working with, she was just really drained, and we were looking at her work calendar, and she said, gosh, I just have meeting after meeting after meeting with people that really drain me.
Mm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Is there anyone in your workplace you can meet with that energizes you, where you can meet with them and you can be accomplishing work? You'd be doing
Mm.
necessary work. And the answer was
Mm.
yes. So
Mm.
the action item was to make sure at least once a week
Mm.
there was a block of time when this person was meeting with someone who energized them and not
Mm.
just people who drained them.
Mm. And we're still within the work context. So still being productive. That's interesting. Hmm.
Yeah. So still everything was very professional. It was all work focused and about accomplishing strategic goals, but making sure part of the process for doing that included some meetings where there would be some energy gain rather than just energy depletion.
Mm. And I mentioned there has to be some awareness then, right? Of like, who is it that energizes, what drains us? How do we go about doing that to figure out? So if someone's saying, okay, I want to recharge, but I'm not sure how I recharge, what would you say to that person?
Yeah. And this is where that self-awareness piece is so critical. And again, I think if I reflect on my story, right, there was a lack of self-awareness around maybe some of the stress I was carrying and where I was carrying it in my body. And over a prolonged period of time, that had very real physical consequences.
Yeah.
So again, part of the unplugging disciplines include disciplines that allow a person to get perspective, sort of get up on the balcony, as I think it's, Ron Heifetz talks about in his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers. Sometimes I'll describe it as, think about the coach up in the press box at the football game, right? He can see the whole field. So, and yeah, it's a plug for coaching. Coaching can help with that. Journaling can help with that. But setting aside some time to disconnect from immediate stimuli, immediate demands, and try to see the whole field. What's going on? Ask some of those questions that allow for deeper reflection and analysis.
And what might be a deeper question that someone can journal on or think about, reflect on?
That's so good. One of my favorites with the energy piece is to say, okay, how much energy am I giving this thing? Give yourself a number 1 to 10, and then say, how much is it worth? And then do the math.
And then someone might discover that we're giving 10 to something that's not really, we don't really need to give a 10 to.
And so then starting to align that, right? I mean, that's a really simple shift as well that can create a significant net gain.
And that we don't have to be at a 10 in energy with everything we do.
No, I'm a huge believer in this satisficing concept. If you're familiar with it, I first came across it. Gretchen Rubin years ago had a book on the Happiness Project.
Oh yeah.
And I sort of describe myself, so recently I bought a printer, needed to replace my home office printer. And I'm looking at all the reviews on Amazon and I'm looking for the best price. I'm comparing 3 or 4 stores. I mean, I'm just maximizing. That'd be the maximizer. I'm going to try to get the best deal and optimize everything.
Yep.
In that maximizer perspective, what we find is you put a lot of energy into making a decision. You make the decision at some point, and then you instantly have buyer's remorse because you find out, there is actually this better deal out there that somehow I missed, or somehow it's not living up to expectation. Now, the good news is maximizers do tend to make good choices. And so we do tend to, or good decisions. So we do tend to find these folks in leadership opportunities or places where they are very successful. But again, the problem is we're looking at sort of the net cost of this process. So another option would be optimize, where we say, okay, what are 3 things that I'm looking for here? And essentially, what's the easiest way to get those 3? Let's just do that, And so when I kind of came to my senses after a week of printer paralysis, I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to Consumer Reports. I'm going to see what they list. I'm going to find it. I got an Office Depot nearby. I'm going to go into Office Depot. I'm going to find the one they have that's on the Consumer Reports recommended list, and I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to walk out and move on.
That reminds me of a book I read recently called Effortless by Greg McKeown.
Yes. I had heard an interview with him where he talks about this idea of asking ourselves, what would make this easier? And I'll often use that as a coaching question as well.
It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I use that in my situation here, right? When I was just like, oh my gosh, I have printer paralysis. This is nuts. How much energy am I giving this? So what would make this easier? Figure out what Consumer Reports recommends, go find it at the local store.
Yeah. And then there's usually an easier way. There's usually a more effortless way. I love that book. And I have someone I follow on social media who always says, let it be easy. And it opens up something in our brain of, how can I let this be easy? It's almost like I feel lighter. I feel like I set a burden down, and I see that in clients too. When I present that concept and ask, how can it be easy? It's like, whoa, this can be easy. It doesn't have to be hard. It's such a crazy concept at first. If we believe that things have to be hard and things have to be challenging, it can be a big shift.
Yeah. Achievers are motivated by challenge. Motivated by accomplishment.
There's a lot of people who listen to podcasts and clients I know who are achievers. Hyperachievers. Sometimes the clients might feel like if they're not achieving, they're not worthy. And so that's something that we talk through.
Well, and with that, I think there can become this sort of this false pairing that has to be decoupled. And that is, if it's worth achieving, it has to be hard, right? If achievers are motivated by challenge. So if it's not challenging enough, then it wasn't. I mean, I didn't, like when I finally finished my PhD, I went, maybe that wasn't hard enough. Like maybe
Oh my
that doesn't
gosh.
count somehow,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
and even that little voice in the back of my head somehow going, I'm not as impressed with that actually. I describe myself as I'm like a pole vaulter, and I'm holding on to the pole and I'm going up and I'm about to get over the bar and I go, oh well, if I can get over this, it must not be hard enough. So with one hand
Mm,
I'm holding onto the pole, grabbing
mm,
the bar with the other, raising it up, going, all right, now I'm going to get over this. What
mm.
a recipe for disaster.
Mm. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I know when I completed my master's, I just got my master's in December with leadership.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Leadership, organizational development, executive coaching. And I loved it. And it was very different from accounting, what I majored in college. Because accounting was like what I wanted for security, for a good career. It wasn't what I was really excited about. But I didn't realize that. I didn't have that awareness. And when I did the master's, I was really excited about it. I loved learning. Just it was fun. I mean, yes, it was hard, but it was fun. And so when I finished, I thought, did I really deserve this? There was that feeling of like, maybe it should have been harder. Maybe I don't deserve it. I mean, I did really well. And so it's interesting. And I'm not like on the achiever. I'm not like the top of the achiever. I know I've had some clients who that's like the number one thing. It's up there, but not like number one. And I still felt that like, oh, I don't know. Was that hard enough? Do I deserve it? It's interesting. I think that's going to resonate with people.
Yeah, and I also got this from the Effortless book, right? That idea of don't confuse excellence and exhaustion.
Mm,
And so I think for a lot of us, there's an assumption if I'm not exhausted, I must
mm,
not be doing enough, challenging myself enough. I must not be living my best life, or
mm.
some version of that.
Yeah, I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people because I think there is sometimes that connection for a lot of people of exhaustion equals excellence. And I see this in coaching clients. Exhaustion means that it'll be excellence. So how do we counter that mentality? How do we get better at not coupling those together?
Well, change starts with awareness, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking of, there's a group called ProSci that has a change management model called the ADKAR, ADKAR. So A stands for awareness, D stands for desire, K is for knowledge, A is for ability, and then R is for reinforcement. So the idea is that although change is not necessarily a linear process, right? It goes through a lot of cycles and iterations and can be sort of a wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey process. The places it gets stuck tend to be linear, meaning if you're not aware of the need for change, you're not going to have change, right? If you're aware but you don't care, no desire, you're stuck. You're not going to make change happen. If you're aware and you care but you don't know what to do, you're stuck. If you're aware and you care and you know what to do but you don't have the skills to do it, the ability to do it, you're stuck. And the thing is, in order to actually make the change itself stick, there's got to be R reinforcement.
Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah, it's such a lovely model. And again, they're really talking about it in an organizational change level, but I've found that model to resonate really well as I work with people one-on-one. So
I can
to that
see
question,
that.
yeah. So how do you uncouple those two? Well, you're going to have to ADKAR it, really, if you want it to stick. So once you're aware, that's good. Okay, what do you care to do about it? What does it mean to you? All right, let's talk about why that's important for you. Great. Now, do you know what you need to do here? Or do you understand the reality of the situation? We'll play this out with the example of me being at Mayo, right? I was aware I had a health issue. I desired to correct it. I didn't know what the issue was, what the real issue was.
You couldn't change it.
Yeah, I was stuck. And so I had to follow up with some skill building, the ability piece through the physical therapy, 2 weeks physical therapy, and really kind of some health coaching, and then came home and applied those skills to reinforce it. So one of the ways I reinforce this stress management and just kind of overall healthcare, right, is Tai Chi. That's one of the things I recommended. Practicing Tai Chi is a way to be much more aware of what's going on in my body, as well as a sort of a stress management tool.
A few weeks ago, I had 2 guests, Dr. Ted Brodkin and Ashley Palethra. They wrote a book called Missing Each Other, and they talk about Tai Chi in their book and being to connect with people. And it's interesting that you bring that up. You're the second person that brings that up on the podcast. And if someone was interested, I'm like, now I'm wondering, I'm like, oh, it's interesting. Well, how do we start with? Like, what's an easy way? I know we're kind of going off on a little tangent.
That's okay. Yeah, well, Google and YouTube, who have
so that's how you started.
Well, that's not how I started necessarily, but as far as if a person's out there and they're wanting to learn some more. I think that could be a good start.
Okay.
Actually, basically a coworker, gosh, how did we even get in on the subject? I think I mentioned to them that I'd been to Mayo, and they wanted me to do Tai Chi. And she said, "Oh, I know this place in town where they do it." So again, from the perspective of Google and YouTube, maybe in the show notes, I'd be very happy to, our local Tai Chi practitioner has some video. They'd be happy to share a link so folks could maybe get some introduction there.
Thank you for that. So the part of the reinforcement was this Tai Chi practice that you incorporated into your life.
Yeah, isn't that something? Also, you may be familiar with positive intelligence, Shirzad Shamin, I think.
Yes. Every time I have a new client, I send out his saboteur, which is the inner critic assessment. It's very powerful. I love his work. I think he's doing really good work. He's out of Stanford.
Yeah. So some of his, what I would call kind of mindfulness type practices, I know sometimes, again, mindfulness is like burnout in the sense that it's kind of a buzzword and it's really fuzzy for folks. So when I define mindfulness, I understand it to mean about being just aware of the present moment, aware of, connected to the present moment. Anything else is just being distracted. And so he has some various PQ exercises, right, that can help with that. And so that's also going to be a way to help with some of that stress management.
And when you say PQ, for someone listening who's PQ exercises, what does that mean?
Sure. Positive intelligence exercises. Yeah. And he starts with things like just rubbing the fingertips together and feeling the ridges. So as silly as that is, what it does is it gets me out of this worrying, ruminating, possibly overly analytical space and focusing on something that's going on now in a very physical kind of sensation. Again, it's kind of, in this sense, reconnecting with our bodies.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah, that and then the belly breathing, deep breathing exercises, practicing those intentionally can be very helpful as well.
Well, I absolutely love this concept of the ad car. I think it's going to serve people really well. And thank you for sharing the Tai Chi piece. What else have you found or that you share through your book about burnout that you'd like the audience to hear about?
Yeah. So when we talk about awareness as the beginning of the ad car, right? So the awareness piece that I usually start with is a mindset shift that needs to happen. So part of my story, again, is I was just sharing all the stuff that was going on in my life around the time of my PhD. For me, self-care felt selfish. Like, I don't have time, right? Like, there's all these other people depending on me. There's this thing I got to get done. There's an organization I'm serving. I don't have time for this self-care, mamby-pamby stuff, right?
And a lot of people feel that way.
Yes. So the shift is to say self-care is not selfish. That actually it's about taking care of yourself so that you can be fully present with the people in your life, so that you can show up for the organization you lead or that team that you manage, and that they can get the best of you. If you are a parent who has ever done some form of car maintenance because you cared about the lives of the people in your car, it's the same principle. When I had younger kids, for whatever reason, it was easier to spend money on tires and brakes than it was when I was just living solo.
I really felt that. I think I got a little bit of chills. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old. And so I think about servicing my car. I make sure that my car is safe and transporting the most precious treasures in my life. So I think that's going to resonate. I think that's a great example or analogy, metaphor to think about self-care.
Yeah.
And I think, I had a conversation with clients last week around this subject of like, it's a busy time and, I don't have time. I don't know if I have time for self-care. So this is very much, and especially with the pandemic, people are overworked right now. There's a lack of boundaries with working from home. So people are really struggling with this.
And I hear sort of a false assumption that self-care requires a lot of time. Notice again, part of the brilliance of the PQ exercises is 30 seconds, 2 minutes, up to 12 minutes. He's got a PQ app that a person can download, right? So there's some 12-minute long mindfulness activities I'll do periodically if I'm feeling a lot of stress. But the breathing I recommend with clients is this idea of, inhale down into the belly for a count of 3, and then exhale for a count of 4, right? So that's approximately 7 seconds or so, and do that 3 times. Okay, so that's about a 30-second break in the day to help calm things down, get a little closer to that parasympathetic state so that you can rest and digest, and then you can be focused again.
Oh,
right. So
thank
things
you
like
for
that don't take a huge amount of time, yet can have a major return. When I don't have an Apple Watch, but if I did, and it was saying breathe, right? What that watch is telling you is that that's an example of that self-maintenance during the day, that self-care during the day. That's very simple that you can do that's going to have a return to help you manage the stress.
Oh, thank you for that. Because I think, I'm a lot better about self-care than I was years ago, a lot better. However, I think I still have the thought that it has to be like a longer period of time. I think that belief, that thought is shared by a lot of people. It has to be something really, a massage, a 1-hour massage is self-care in our mind. So thank you for highlighting that and pointing that out.
Yeah, you bet. I think some of that again goes with that achiever mindset that somehow we got to make it hard for it to count.
Wow, that's going to resonate. Well, what
Yeah,
else?
and there are a lot of things in life there are a lot of worthwhile things in life that are hard and do require a lot of effort.
Right.
But that's not everything.
Yeah.
So let's reserve our energy for the things that do demand that kind of effort.
So you said something that you wanted to highlight from the book was the mindset shift. Is there anything else that you want to highlight from the book that you'd like to share with the audience?
The mindset shift gives you permission then to start the journey. We've talked a little bit about managing the energy piece. I do want to talk about the depersonalization or that disconnect piece. So as I mentioned previously, I taught humanities classes for a while. And as part of that, would talk about the difference between a comedy and a tragedy. The basic difference is not that one is funny and one is sad. It's that comedies end in community. You look at the Shakespearean plays, it's often a wedding, right? Whereas tragedies end in isolation, right?
Oh, that's
like
wow.
Oedipus Rex he's right sent away on his own, blinded. And so thinking in terms of, okay, am I choosing to live a comic story or a tragic story? And that when we go down that depersonalization path, that disconnect path, that cynicism, we're setting ourselves up for a tragic story, not a common one.
Yeah, I think I've realized in my life and with clients too, and we talk about this in that podcast on how to make meaningful connections, is sometimes when we're feeling down, we go into this deep cave because we feel shame and we don't want to be vulnerable. And so just connecting with people, sharing our experience with someone we trust can get us out of that cave.
Yeah. If you're in a hole, you need someone to throw you a rope.
And that can help us beat that burnout and that feeling of stress and pressure.
Yeah, the negative stress. Yeah.
The negative, the distress.
Maybe one other concept that I got from a friend of mine who's a counselor, that he was actually talking about this in terms of managing depression that he was recommending to someone, but I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect for the burnout stuff we're talking about as well. And it's this idea of every day do something necessary, something meaningful, and something fun, right?
Oh. So what was that? You said something necessary?
Yeah, something necessary, something meaningful, and something fun. And I'll briefly reconnect that. So remember, we talked about 3 dimensions of burnout, right? So emotional exhaustion. Well, I think when you're doing something fun, it helps re-engage you, re-energize you, right? So that's kind of part of that rest. That can be part of the rest and refreshing piece. Remember, we talk about ineffectiveness. So if you do something necessary, that's going to help with that ineffectiveness piece, because you can at least point to that. Like that great graduation speech about, every day make your bed, right? So at least you can point to that. You at least got that. And then do something meaningful. That's about reconnecting to that sense of purpose, reconnecting with people. Those 3 things, that's going to help. That's part of that self-maintenance and self-care that allows you to show up so that you can beat burnout for yourself, your family, and your team.
And would you recommend, I wrote this down, would you recommend, like I thought, oh, maybe I should write that on my planner every day, where I is there any value to writing it down, or is it reflecting about it at night? Or is this just something we think about? What have you seen works best in your life or in your clients' lives?
Yeah. In my life, it's about giving myself permission to do those things when I feel busy. So sometimes I'm making a choice between what am I going to do for the next 10 minutes, 5 minutes, or 30 minutes. and I'm managing different tasks and multiple projects, and I'll go, wait a minute, this thing in front of me is meaningful, the other one not as much. So where I may feel the sense of urgency to do this other thing, I'm going to choose the meaningful because I know I need this in order to stay in my sort of high functioning state. It's funny, my to-do lists tend to be, like a lot of people, they're long and they don't get everything checked, but they've been getting shorter over the last year or so, actually, as I've been kind of applying some of this for myself. And there's definitely like a hierarchy there. And after 2 or 3 things that are the most important things, there's kind of a sense of permission of, okay, make sure I'm also taking care of the meaningful, the necessary, and the fun while I'm in this space. I use a planner that's recommended by Donald Miller, his Business Made Simple system, Hero on a Journey is the module. And one of the questions there that is, if I were to do this day over, what would I do differently? Right. So those kind of things are very helpful for framing the day.
And so you've trained your brain to kind of think about, oh, I have this time, a little bit of time here. And then asking yourself, okay, what would be meaningful? What could I do that might be a little bit fun for me? Maybe not a little bit, but just fun.
or just recognizing, when those opportunities show up, recognize, oh, this is an opportunity to do the meaningful thing, or this is an opportunity to do the necessary thing. This is an opportunity to do the fun thing. So while I may have, it'd also be a chance to check my email or whatever. I'm going to go do this other thing. I think the internet is a wonderful invention. I also think it sort of takes our human brokenness and just superpowers it. Right. And so part of that brokenness is just being prone to distractions or worry. And the internet is great at delivering things that can distract us and make us worry.
Yeah. Sometimes I find myself scrolling through Instagram and thinking, oh, I just wasted 15 minutes when I could have done something or read a little bit of the book I'm reading or gone for a 10-minute walk, or like I could have done something different with that time. And I feel drained.
Numbing through social media rather than resting. Right. Yeah. Last night, some high school friends posted something funny and my wife saw it on Facebook. And so I went on there to post my witty repartee, right? My witty reply, right? What am I doing there? Well, that's connecting. And that's kind of social media as part of a rest and re-energizing thing versus the numbing of just
the doom scroll. Well, Stan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I think this is going to be really helpful for so many people. How can people find your book? How can people follow along?
Yeah, so a couple recommendations. One is go to Amazon. There you'll find How to Beat Burnout for yourself, your family, and your team. I'll be glad to leave a link in your show notes. And the other is I've actually created an audiobook version of the course, an audiobook version that is also an e-course. So I'll be glad to send a link for that, as well as a 20% off coupon that I'm running a discount during fall 2021.
Awesome.
And we'll encourage folks to try that. I've gotten really good responses. If you like audiobooks, it sort of takes the audiobook concept and next levels it by allowing some more interactivity, and you even get a little certificate of completion at the end.
Cool.
Everybody likes badges.
I'm all about certificates. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being on the podcast. This was really helpful.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.